waste time or take this slow. We've got miles behind us, but miles to go. So let's just break this down to the simplest truth. You and I as one will always be better than two.
And welcome to Relaxed and Free, a clinically minded, biblically based counseling podcast. I'm your host, Cary Corley, here with my good friend and producer and sound engineer, editor, all of those things.
I'm Doug. Hi.
Doug Bonebrake.
Nice to meet you.
He's just Doug.
Yep.
I'm Doug.
Here I am.
Yeah. We're also here with Francis O'Donnell. Welcome, Francis.
Hello. And Doug's just my friend. He's not my producer, my sound technician.
Not yet. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, because Francis is kind of interested in starting his own podcast. Hopefully, this just piques that even more.
Yeah.
It's a teaser.
It's a teaser.
That's it.
Yeah. Francis and I have not spent a ton of time together. I think we've had lunch once, and then we really just kind of swim in the same circles. Before we started recording, we were talking about we have a connection to the late Larry Cornine.
Yeah.
He was a congregant of yours.
I had the pleasure of pastoring Larry for about 15 years, and I met him, I think, 21 years ago when I was a student pastor, and he came and did a seminar talking about midlife. I don't know if I was in midlife, but I sure felt like it. And he explained some things that really got me moving towards some healing in my own life, understanding depression, how to manage that, that I just wasn't an angry person. I was a person that was struggling with depression at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so that was kind of a real eye-opener for me. And so then it was great how God just kind of worked it out that a man that helped me in my 30s, I got to pastor in my 40s and 50s. So
that's cool. Great.
Yeah. He's a good friend.
He uncovered that like in a seminar? Is that what he said?
He was talking about a seminar. I'm like, is he talking about me?
Yeah.
And I was like, he is. And my wife said, boy, I'm so glad that Larry figured you out because I've been trying for a long time. And so, so I still refer to that when I was doing pastoral counseling as a pastor with guys who are angry, trying to identify, it's not just anger. What's the root of that is probably depression.
Yeah, dude, that is so true. Because as men, most of us feel anger very easily, right? And we don't really like sadness. Sadness is vulnerable.
Sadness is weak, right? And so when that's your predominant emotion, there's something going on there.
Mm-hmm,
and so I guess what he talked about, the term that really got me going was this idea of frozen rage. That you're mad, you don't even know why you're mad.
Wow.
And that was my state of mind a lot. And I was also struggling with the beginning of diabetes at that point. And, and so, but that really kind of helped me. And then there's been some other things we can talk about later some things that he taught me as I pastored him, he pastored me alongside as I was pastoring him. So
Very cool.
He was quite the encourager. He is a modern day Barnabas. He was always encouraging people. I know, Doug, that he encouraged Lindsay quite a bit in her career.
Yeah. He is so pivotal pretty much through our entire relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Cornine has been there as this looming tower of a person who's,
You sound intimidated.
No, it's more out of reverence.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Okay. It is respect. So what did we say about phones?
That was
that would be my tile in my wallet because I'm kind of a forgetful person. So my kids bought me a tile for my keys and my wallet. So you'll never forget the time my tile went off during the podcast.
That's
I can't
true.
wait to tell my kids that.
No, it shows that it works.
It does work. You got one too. Chris has got one too.
Chris might be slightly upset because Doug was shaming him right before recording started to turn his phone off.
My wife would always say, "Hey, your pocket's going off again." So, so terrible. Yeah. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. So he was just always, he was always working to help her through her career. Right, he mentored her through the doctoral process at Midwestern, and I don't remember what that's called, sponsoring. For the dissertation, he was on her dissertation committee. He helped her get her job after getting her, So he just had influenced her, and she kind of came alongside him in this last chapter of his life. And, you know, I think she's very fortunate, and she there's some weight to it, right? But she's continuing his mission at Central, where she's doing that now. So, and it's funny
insane how that works out, because, you know, Lindsay was my ministry assistant,
right?
You know, for 3 years while she was going to seminary, and, and also was an intern at her church.
Yep.
And it's funny how God puts people in your lives, you know, and I know you guys call him Dr. Cornine. I'm not bragging, but I got to call him Larry. So I loved calling him Larry, and just meant a lot to me, you know, helped me walk through the grief process when my mother passed away, and just was always there for when the church was going through tough times. If there was some sort of conflict, I would get all upset, and Larry would say to me, "Francis, why do we got to poke him in the nose? Why do you want to poke him in the nose?" So that was kind of his thing of, "Hey, calm down there, wild man." So
yeah, Cary shared the story of how this podcast got its name on our first episode. And it was just, and my feedback was stammering like I am now, which was just like, he was just stable. Like I don't know how, I just seeing him whenever we would visit Nolan, now the Gathering, and we'd see him, you know, it was just like, there is a stable dude who's he's just, you know, and I'm looking at him like, man, how do I get to be that content and stable?
Amen to that.
Like,
so we're throwing around all these church names, Nolan Road and the Gathering, all this.
Yeah.
So Francis, you were a pastor. You served in the local church since 1986. You were a youth pastor and a children's pastor, a family pastor, a discipleship pastor, a lead pastor. How long were you a pastor for?
I was in the ministry for about 35 years.
Okay, and now you're retired.
My wife says I'm unemployed. So she likes to.
That's good.
And if the stock market keeps going down, I may be employed again.
Yeah, sure.
So right now, I like to say I'm a freelance pastor, because I'm not really bound to church stuff, but I'm still doing some pastoral care and counseling with folks.
Yeah, and you mentioned you're doing some consulting with other pastors and stuff like that. Because I don't know if this surprises any of our listeners, but churches have issues.
Yeah, they do.
And pastors have issues. Yeah, what? Huh?
What?
Yeah,
What?
and a lot of times in church world, pastors who were successful in their ministries can come alongside other pastors and mentor them and consult, especially like for conflict and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was blessed to have a really good team, a good staff, you know, at the Gathering, formerly Nolan Road, and then we merged with another church, and we have had a location in Independence and Blue Springs. And I felt like my job the last 5 years or so was coaching the younger guys, teaching about, you know, how to have productive conflict, you know, how to deal with people, how to walk alongside people, not leave them behind. And those guys they're killing it now, you know, and they're, you know, and I just loved working with them. I learned from them too. And so it was a good, for me, the last 5-6 years, just kind of, actually about the last 7 years, kind of knowing that I was going to transition out around the age of 55, because I felt like the Lord had some other things for me, but that was pretty important.
You got your training in counseling, right?
Yeah. So I think the most important degree I got was my bachelor's of social work, and understanding family systems and learning the skills continuum, you know, and understanding, you know, the importance of listening. And so that was kind of important to me. So, you know, I was trained in systems theory in my undergrad. And then when I went to seminary,
family systems theory.
Yeah. Bowen's family systems theory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we get a for dummies explanation of that?
Yeah.
High level?
So one of the keys to family systems is understanding the genogram.
Yeah.
You know, the family generations.
I mean, I don't want to brag, but I do a genogram with all of my clients.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I do.
Is that similar to like the genetic map of your your phenotype and your genotypes? I'm sorry, I'm the scientist is trying to relate this.
So we
to
take blood at the beginning of every session.
Yes.
And,
then we send it off to a lab, and it's
genetic counseling, right? You put a box for a person, and And then you just go through your family tree, and then you mark their traits.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, you can trace things like divorce, addiction.
Yeah.
You know.
From a counseling and social work perspective, it's less in the genetics and more in the relational, right? So you're going to be tracking divorces and family conflict and prison
addiction.
Yeah.
So it's a family tree.
Yes.
With societal or behavioral or mental health type issues layered on top.
Yeah, things
to
that
track it generationally.
Things that a professional would be interested in. That like, oh, this is relevant.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This is relevant to this person's story.
Bring that to a screeching halt.
Well, this was part of who you became.
Yeah,
because this is your history, you know. And so, you know, you look at those things. For me, I had an aha moment in seminary when actually I had to do a genogram in college and then in seminary. So honestly, I used the same paper twice, but it was even more impactful the second time through to be able to trace certain things in my own family, you know, addiction, just different things, some depression and things like that. And it kind of opened your eyes to things.
Amen. Yeah.
You know, and you're like, well, I'm not just weird. I mean, these are some things that I passed down. And then there's different roles that people play within the family too, you know?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And then you talk about enmeshed relationships or, you know, which is more like a codependent relationship. And you
say you had a really good codependent joke.
Yeah, I had a good codependent joke, but we won't share it on the podcast.
Oh, really? Oh.
Well,
burn.
So. But so that was really good for me, you know, because, you know, growing up, I just didn't feel comfortable in my own skin, you know, and so those things in college, you know, helped me have healthy relationships. You know, my wife was my high school sweetheart.
And her name
is Shanna.
Shanna. Okay.
Yeah. And so you know, besides Jesus, she's the most important person in my life because, you know, she shared faith with me when I was an angry teenager. And I didn't want to hear it because, you know, I grew up, my mom, I'm half Japanese. I'm Japanese Irish.
I was about to say, enlighten us on not feeling comfortable in your own skin. So, and does it have to do with being half Japanese? Or?
Part was that, you know, there were several factors, you know. We moved to my dad was in the Air Force, met my mom in the 60s. My mom was a rebellious teenager, was trying to get out of the house because there was all kinds of weird stuff going on in her family. My grandfather had a concubine, you know, all that, because Asian culture at that time was so different than. So my mom
would be full blood Japanese.
My mom was full Japanese. Her name was Masako. You know, she was the strongest, most broken person I knew.
That's a powerful statement.
And you know, in the last year of her life, there was a lot of healing between her and I, understanding some things. We can talk about that later, but it was. You
can talk about it now, man.
So my mom basically married my dad to get out of her house.
Okay.
My mom, and I'm going to be really open because these are some things my mom told me. My mom was a victim of rape when she was 16 years old. And she had never told anybody that except her mom. Her mom took her to get an abortion.
Oh, wow.
And my mom and I were driving to a doctor's appointment, and she started sharing this stuff with me. And she had never told anybody. And
take your time.
Don't mean to get emotional, but to think about that she carried that long, you know, and because a lot of times I didn't understand where my mom was coming from things because she was a typical, I don't want to be stereotypical, but she was a tough Asian mom.
Sure.
And she had to be because she, you know, my dad left us when I think I was 7. And so that was part of the not feeling comfortable. My dad was a serial adulterer. You know, when my mom was pregnant with me, he was, you know, with another woman. And so that was, you know, and so I'll never forget as an adult, I was going through some stuff and I found the letter that my dad wrote my mom asking for divorce. You know, and so reading that letter and then having these conversations with my mom in the last year of her life, because she lived with us for about 6 months. She'd been ill. And it was a real healing time because began to understand her pain and her brokenness,
her trauma,
her trauma, you know, and so why she had so many controlling tendencies, and so that was real helpful, having those conversations, and just loving my mom even more. My mom did come to faith later in life because we grew up Buddhist.
Okay.
So, we would chant. We had a Gehunzum, our little shrine in our house. And so while you guys were going to Sunday school, I was going to the Buddhist community center,
in Kansas City.
In Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah. We kind of ended up in Missouri because, we had moved to California after we moved to Whiteman Air Force Base in Knob Noster.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to California. Then my dad went to Korea. And this is kind of Vietnam. We thought he was going to Vietnam, but he ended up going to Korea.
Mm.
Well, he went and he never came back. That's when he met the other woman. And so my mom, I remember my dad when we were in California, he would come, he just drunk, would try to grab my mom, pull her on the floor. He'd slap us around, and so that's kind of what I knew growing up.
Yeah.
And so my mom, bravest woman I know, she worked in a liquor store. She didn't hardly speak any English, and so I, vividly remember one night my dad was having those episodes, and we left and we slept in the car in the parking lot of a bowling alley.
Wow.
And so that was so vivid in my mind, but my mom didn't remember it because she could cut it off,
She siphoned it,
yeah,
or siloed it.
We would call it, compartmentalization.
Yeah, and my mom told me one of the things that was real freeing for me was she would remember things I didn't remember, things that she, if she got a little physical or something like that, which I would at that point I don't think it was abuse. She was just trying to get me to shut up because I was a mouthy kid, angry mouthy kid, and so so she apologized for a lot of things. And, and then once you understand the trauma or the hurt that she went through, because, when my grandfather brought the concubine into the house, my mom's mom told her, "That's your mother now."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this stuff my mom went through, and she held in, so, and so she struggled with depression a lot in her life. I remember when I was 10 or 12, her father died. My mom went to bed. Just went to bed for a long time, and then
just stayed there.
Yeah, and then went to Japan. And so my mom went to Japan and left us by ourselves. My brother.
How old were you?
I was probably 12. My older brother was 14, and so she gave us some money. Said, "Hey, if you got any problems, call." But my mom was a kid when she started having us. So that's kind of where I kind of grew up very angry. So we moved back to the States and we moved to Raytown, Missouri, which is funny because, we lived off 63rd Street and we lived in an apartment. My mom was working her tail off. She was never home because she had to provide for 3 sons.
Oh, yeah.
And, the Japanese family wanted to give my mom money for us to move back to Japan. But my mom told her father, "Well, my kids are American. They're going to stay in America." And so fascinating.
I'm sure that went over well.
Yeah, it didn't. It didn't. And so we moved to Raytown. We got evicted from our apartment. I still remember that. And so we moved to Warrensburg because there was a good Japanese community around there. Folks connected with Air Force Base.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I grew up. And, I kind of struggled in school as a young person because, back in the day, no one asked you what was going on in your home.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just.
So are we in the 70s?
We're in the 70s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 70, 75, 76.
Yeah. Mental health was not on.
Yeah. And then when they started
radar.
deregulating and people got kicked out of psych hospitals. And so
that would have been right before, I think, because when was Reagan? It was around that time.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So this is in the 70s. And, I used to laugh because, when I was a youth pastor, I'd tell a story. I felt like I had 3 strikes against me because, first of all, and during that time, there's just a lot of racism.
Sure.
And so you're coming off Vietnam. And so.
Thank God all that's gone.
Yeah. We're in such a better place now.
Well, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. But that's, yeah. Am I sensing a hinge of sarcasm here?
Maybe just a little bit. Did it come through on the microphone?
Yeah, I felt that loud and clear. So I just remember, being called all kinds of derogatory things.
Jeez.
And my mom went through a lot of sexual harassment, single woman working, and so, it was just kind of a rough upbringing. So, I just was a really kind of a violent child. I fought a lot. I was in trouble a lot. And it was just that's kind of how it was.
Yeah.
But then, I met this kid, his name's Monty, and I'd go play catch with him. We'd play basketball together. He was kind of he was a kind of a rich white kid, and his dad was a banker, and we literally lived on the other side of the tracks. We were in an African American neighborhood. We were the only we weren't white. We were the Asian family in the neighborhood, and so we were getting it from white and African Americans, just all kinds of stuff. And so Monty, invited me to church for the first time, and I remember going to church and being so confused because I was raised a Buddhist, and in my head I'm like, what's this all about? So I just, in my own mind, I said, okay, so there's God, there's Jesus, and there's Buddha, and they're just all family,
Yes.
Are
they? So what kind of church was this?
It was a Baptist church.
It was Baptist.
Yeah,
okay.
Baptist church. So I think he took me to RAs, Royal Ambassadors, and I can still smell the chicken pot pie in the fellowship hall. Now,
is that a good memory?
I think that's a core memory. Yeah, that's a good memory.
You're smiling.
So I'm smiling. Yeah. So
yeah.
But Monty had a little sister, and her name was Shanna. She was kind of a pest, and so we eventually moved away. My mom got a better job, and we rented another place, and we finally, home ownership was a big deal. My mom was able to buy a house. And at the end of her life, that was a challenge because she'd worked so hard for the house, and she wasn't really physically able to take care of it, and her health was poor, and so she didn't want to leave the house, and so she lived with us for a while after she was sick, and then she passed away, and since then we've sold the house. That was kind of an emotional thing going through the house. But so, growing up, I went through elementary school, junior high, pretty angry kid. And the things that kept me out of trouble were sports.
Okay.
And so, sports, excelled at sports. I'm not living in the glory days, but that's what kept me busy, kept me out of trouble.
Yeah.
And then, in high school, I started, I played football and I wrestled, and I'll never forget, it was a wrestling practice, and, the girls' basketball team would practice in the gym. And so I would look in the window and just admire the basketball skills, the dribbling, the passing.
Yeah. Great bounce pass.
Yeah. But there's this really cute girl, and I finally, I got up the courage, and I thought it was mistletoe, and I showed it to this girl, and I said, "Here's some mistletoe." She says, "It's not mistletoe, idiot. It's holly." So growing up in a Japanese family, we didn't really do Christmas at all, hardly. I didn't know the difference. It could have been spinach as far as us.
Right.
And so I remember asking her out, and on that first date, she asked me, "Do you know Jesus Christ is your personal Lord and Savior?" I'm like, "What?
Goodness.
Man.
What grade is this?
This is how I was.
Like 8th grade.
I was a junior in high school. At this point, she was a freshman. I'm like, "Don't you know?"
She came right at it.
Don't you know that I said, no, I said, I don't, and I don't need it. I said, that's, religions. At this point, I had kind of moved away from Buddhism and kind of moved away from religion, and just was like, this is for weak people. I don't need this, blah, 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 and so, but in order to date her, I had to go to church.
Oh.
Yeah. A little missionary dating. We don't really,
condone these things.
Yeah. So, so I'd go to church with her, and really didn't get much out of it. I just wasn't there, and it was just kind of a different church, And so one night I thought she was going to be at this thing, FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. This was in Warrensburg. So I went to this meeting thinking she'd be there because I thought all Christians went to all the same things.
Right.
and she wasn't there. But I remember that night they showed this movie called High Point, and it was about a guy that had everything but felt empty inside. And I didn't have everything, but I felt empty inside. I was one of the star athletes in the school. I was kind of popular. but I felt empty. I'll never forget it. I went home and I just started weeping. I mean, I'm in my living room. I'm just weeping. So I went to go find somebody. So I walked down the street to my art teacher's house. I knew he was a Christian. He wasn't home. So then I went to the football coach's house because he let kids off early for practice to go to church on Wednesday nights, and I figured he was a Christian because he didn't let us cuss during practice. If we cussed, we had to run laps. So,
wow, a football coach.
Yeah. So I went to his house and I remember going and I was crying. He goes, "What's wrong?" I said, "Look," "I need Jesus." And so it was March 29th, 1983. I received Christ as my personal Lord and Savior in his living room, and later on he told me, he says, "Man, I thought the police were after you or something." And so, and I went home, and I did what every good Christian supposed to do. I told my mom and she told me to leave.
Really?
Because, in Japanese culture, there's this whole idea of shame and honor. And I dishonored her because I chose a different religion. And so we just didn't talk about it much, And so I walked around the block, came home and said, "Mom, it's ridiculous. I don't have a job. I can't do this, So I stayed and, I snuck off to get baptized, different stuff like that. But you don't
hear a lot of that in American culture. But obviously it exists, right?
Yeah. When you talk about, that shame and honor culture is also in the New Testament, and that's why it's so wild when you look at the prodigal son that, this prodigal son dishonored his father. So if you're reading that as a first century, person, I mean, that's dishonorable. But
take your inheritance and hit the road.
The road. But yet you're father,
essentially saying, "You're dead to me."
That's right.
Family.
Exactly. Yeah. And so for me, the pursuit of faith, or, however you look at it, wherever your theological bent is,
So what I hear you saying though is like your mom in that moment when you came home felt as though you were saying, "You don't matter. My family doesn't matter.
Your family doesn't matter.
You guys are dead to me. I'm choosing this faith."
Man, she was mad. I remember she sent the Buddhist gang after me too.
Really?
Oh yeah, they came. "Hey, Francis, you can be Buddhist and Christian at the same time." That's what they told me.
Huh.
And I knew a little bit about.
So that's a completely different version of what I had in my head as a gang. In terms of I don't know, kind of seeing some snapping fingers and some sharks and jets with the Buddhist gang.
West Side Story there.
Yeah. So was your mom was she really deep into the Buddhist religion, but for herself because she truly believed it, or because that was what you did? I mean, for the same reasons that she was disappointed that you left.
Well, my mom was she came from the Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, NSA, which was created after World War II in Hiroshima, and it was this idea of Buddhism to create world peace. And so this idea, it was a value creation society to create world peace. So when you guys are going to church camp, I'm going to world peace conferences.
Oh, wow.
And so for my mom, so as Christians, we're called to share the gospel or called to share the hope that we have in Christ, in a respectful, gentle way. My mom, she worked at an Air Force base. And so in her faith, they called it shakabuku, which was evangelism. So we would have meetings at our house and people would come to our house, and I don't know how many people she converted to Buddhism, So it was a big deal to her because here she is and she's an up and riser in her faith. And people know her, and
so this wasn't just like a familial.
No,
there's lots of people out there that would say like, I'm Jewish or I'm Catholic.
Yeah, so it wasn't cultural at all. It was a real deal for her.
Yeah,
and so
that was like a personal affront to her.
Yeah. It's like I could see that. It's like when
That's tough.
When it's like being a pastor and your kids say,
"Oh, right.
Hey, I'm
joining Islam." Yeah.
This isn't for me.
Yeah. A lot of pastors' kids just renounce the faith, and we've already kind of talked about this new deconstruction trend or whatever. But I have had many a pastor in my office weeping
Yeah.
because their children walk away.
Yeah, in our family, I've got 4 kids. 3 are walking with the Lord, one's not.
Mm-hmm.
But what I know about the gospel is the story's not finished.
Amen.
And so whenever you go through those tough times in family, I've told, you don't put a period there, you put a comma or a semicolon because it's not done, right? And the mantra I live by is this: that God's in control. Don't burn a bridge, and you're not the only person going through this.
Yeah.
Amen.
And when you can put that in your head, and then, it's because we're so extreme in our emotions and our feelings. It's not the end of the world. It's just, it's a crisis of belief for them, so how are we going to respond to that?
Right.
We're going to get angry and have that emotional cutoff, and are we going to just love them where they're at?
Right.
And so we're walking through that as a family, loving our kids where they're at.
Yeah. Amen. And I love that stuff because you're bringing up actually some points, right, that Lindsay, Dr. Bonebrake,
yes,
brought
Dr. Bonebrake
on her interview episode. Thank you. Also her interview, but she was talking about how we as Christians fall into the trap of trying to hold all other people, regardless of their faith, to the Christian morals and standards. So there is that component, right, where you have to, even if it is your family member, your child, you have to remember, like, they may not be there yet.
That's
and
right.
then part 2 of that is, like, for me, I was a late convert, and I had to get there myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a very common story. I think we all understand it, right? You had to get there yourself too.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all, and you did as well from your interview episode.
Yeah. He's just pointing to me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Cary. Dr. Corley.
Oh dear.
Mr. Host of the show. But I was a late convert. You guys were talking about all the Christian bands and stuff before this, and I don't know any of that stuff because
they weren't any good. So don't.
I mean, I heard some great renditions, but so yeah, I think that whole notion of some people can convert their parents' faith to their own.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And other people need to reject their parents' faith and find their own.
Yeah.
Right.
And so
well, it's not faith if it's not their own.
That's right.
Right. But some people, right, like Lindsay, can convert, like she converted her parents' faith and the patterns of going to these church things.
Mm-hmm.
And then she discovered what they saw and saw it through their eyes. And then she was able to make it her own.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. I was like, just don't. You guys don't make any sense. Let me get confirmed so I can stop going to church and sleeping on Sundays. I get to make my choice. So,
there's a theme. There's a theme in your life there, Doug.
What, I keep cutting him off?
No, that's great.
No, that's good.
Well, I've just heard you say it several times of like, don't tell me what to do. This is my choice.
Yes. Well, yes, I'm being a broken record because that is a pattern in my life. That
I think a lot of people struggle with that. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people, particularly pastors' kids, who struggle with that, with the expectation that I have to be something.
Yeah.
And if I'm not that thing, then my family's going to suffer because of me. Mm-hmm. So I better just keep my mouth shut and go along and get along.
Right.
And then they get into their 20s and they're like, I'm done.
Yeah. And well, but that's what's so great about what you're talking about, Francis, is that the way that you're approaching that, speaking from someone who kind of walked, and I'm not a pastor's kid by any means, but by handling it that way of like, hey, we love you no matter what. Like, here's some things to remember. Like, don't go too far, don't do whatever, but it's okay. Like, you got to come up to this on your own. Like, when you approach it that way, you're not going to break them. Like, you're not going to push them to the point where they just can't take it anymore because they've been having to try and live this stereotypical pastor's child life and be perfect, and the whole congregation's always watching you and all this stuff. And that will break people, some people, right? So I just think that's great.
We are blessed to, I served in 2 churches for about 26 years. so we were blessed to have longevity.
Mm-hmm.
And both those churches were.
So that's almost unheard of.
Yeah, and both those churches loved our kids.
Mm-hmm.
They were, my kids. Well, it may be perceived, but they'll tell you there wasn't a lot of, expectations because we had our kids didn't have to be at everything. We had our non-negotiables. You're going to be there Sunday morning, but they were allowed to, they played sports. The church was so good. I coached sport. I coached all my kids. And so it was great because one of the things that I remember hearing from church, we're so glad that you model to our church the importance of family.
Yeah, like a healthy balance.
Because a lot of pastors don't.
No, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, and you fostered, a phenomenal community there.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was when my wife
this
and I.
This is Nolan Road Baptist, right?
This is Nolan Road Baptist, now the Gathering Baptist.
Yeah.
But and Lindsay, my Lindsay, we need a shorthand for that. Lindsay AY, Lindsay Bonebrake,
LB.
Yeah, LB. She, worked for you as what was it? A secretary,
ministry assistant.
Ministry assistant. Yeah. Sorry, is secretary not politically correct?
No,
Boy, I just got
us canceled. I can't keep up.
I just got us canceled. Awkward. Anyway, and but it's in Independence. And we live in Overland Park, and that was really difficult for us because we wanted to be there. Because, the first time I walked into your church, it was like a big hug.
Mm-hmm.
And not just
I think you're just sucking
physically.
up now.
No. I've told him this before, but I just need to lay it down.
Oh, shucks.
I'm providing some validation that he, in fact, does model family well. And it goes from the top down.
Yeah.
And it lasts because your staff then follow in line and all that stuff. And so, no matter how many years we haven't been back, if we go back, it's a warm welcome and just feels safe and comfortable. So kudos to you on that. I do have a question. How did you get into that? How did you get into the,
Well, let's go ahead and actually take a break and and then we'll start with that question because then we can move into the question portion.
Okay.
Answering all those cool, how you get into that and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Let's do it. At Lakewood Family Therapy, we aim to be your refuge in the storm. We're professional Christian counselors whose sole purpose is to bring healing to your family and hope for the future. If you'd like a free 15-minute phone consultation with one of our professional counselors, you can call or text 816-663-9751 or head on over to our website, lwfamilytherapy.com. We'd love to hear from you. Lakewood Family Therapy, where faith, family, and future is our number one priority.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week for part 2 of this interview. Relaxed and Free is a presentation of Lakewood Family Therapy. Catch up on other episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate and review. Every review honestly helps us bring you this content. Production and engineering led by Doug Bonebrake. Recording done by Chris Renfro. Stay relaxed and free.
Let's not waste time or take this slow. We've got miles behind us, but miles to go. So let's just break this down to the simplest truth. You and I as one will always be better than two. Yeah, you and I as one will always be better than